Muy buenos días a todos. Gracias por asistir a esta tercera sesión de nuestro ciclo acerca de la experiencia de curar en los años 2020 y 2021 alrededor del mundo y una serie de casos arquetípicos acerca de qué implica la práctica cultural en un momento de crisis y cambio. Y hoy tenemos una presentación que es para mí un placer infinito. Eso voy a empezar diciendo que siempre que hablo, interactúo o veo a mis amigos del Raqs Media Collective en Delhi, es un gran placer. Entonces, hoy vamos a hablar con el Raqs, que está integrado desde 1992 por Mónica Narula, Shuddhabrata Sengupta y Jeebesh Bagchi, y el Raqs Media Collective, que se originó del trabajo original de cine, hoy perdido, de estos tres colegas en India, a principios de los 90, se ha desarrollado en una práctica que precisamente tiene como su lema lo imprevisible y avanzar en un terreno que no está definido. El Raqs se ha definido a sí mismo el imperativo de lo que ellos llaman una contemplación cinética en relación a generar una trayectoria que no tiene una lógica premeditada, sino que al contrario está tratando de vivir el tiempo y producir la anticipación de lo que puede ser la cultura a través de una mezcla de la especulación, la excavación y el compromiso en una variedad de prácticas, algunas intelectuales, algunas educativas, algunas artísticas y también en relación a la producción de exhibiciones y eventos. Bueno, la trayectoria de Raqs ha sido extensísima. Han estado en las bienales principales de Documenta, de Venecia, de Estambul, de Taipei, de Liverpool, de Shanghai, de Sydney, de Sao Paulo. Han tenido retrospectivas en una variedad de lugares. De una manera prominente fueron sujetos de una retrospectiva hace unos 6 años por parte del MUAC, en colaboración con el Centro de Arte 2 de Mayo y la Fundación PROA en Buenos Aires. Y bueno, recientemente han tenido también exhibiciones en Atenas, en el Festival Fast Forward y en el Museo Árabe de Doha, además de la trayectoria de curaduría que incluye proyectos en el MAGMA y muy recientemente, y ese va a ser uno de los temas principales de nuestra conversación, en la Trienal de Yokohama del año 2020. Entonces, bueno, les simplemente aviso a nuestros escuchas que la conversación va a ser en inglés, pero en el chat de YouTube van a ustedes encontrar instrucciones para acceder a la transmisión con traducción simultánea que la Cátedra Inés Amor ha preparado. Aida va a interpretar al español, de modo que la transmisión fundamental va a ser en inglés, pero les ruego que revisen lo que ya debe estar poniendo Lucía Melia en el chat en YouTube y que cada cierto tiempo estará reiterando para poder acceder a la traducción. Entonces, bueno, Mónica, Jeebesh, Shuddha, please come in because we're going to start.
Thank you,
Just
Cuauhtémoc.
introduce you. Hello, how are you?
I'm Jeebesh.
I'm Shuddha.
Great to see you,
I'm
Monica.
I'm Shuddha Cuauhtémoc, in case you don't remember.
I will try to remember, but I need to tell you that I was explaining to everybody that every interaction I have with you, beyond being illuminating and important in a long trajectory, is always a huge pleasure. And I know that we are forced by good manners and tradition to say these things as a matter of convention, but you know that in your case is something heartfelt and real. Is one of the most exciting things that can happen to me, to have a conversation with you. And I'm really grateful that you accepted to be part of this little series that are trying to review and narrate and explore what has been the experience of organizing and both exhibitions and cultural events, and also keeping on with our practice as artists and curators and producers in these faithful 2 years that are probably, I keep on telling people, it feels like it is our world war, no? That is what we are going to keep on telling people the rest of our lives. In 2020, I was blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you not hear me?
I guess it's a little bit like the Decameron, no? I mean, we are all telling each other stories by the fireside. And I was just thinking the other day, Jeebesh had something to say to one of us, Monica and me in the studio, when he started saying, do you remember what it was about anticipation? Mm-hmm. And I think anticipation is a very strange emotion, because it doesn't tell you what's going to come. It just tells you, it gives you, there is a Raqs work that we have, which was called, it's just called waiting, you know. There's premonition, there's waiting, there's that feeling of something's going to happen, but you don't know what. And I think that before the time of the pandemic, we all have experienced, and during this time, we've come to understand anticipation differently. So I'm going to start by saying, Jeebesh, please remind us, what was it about anticipation?
No, it has connected to the images. Let the images come, because it's an interesting story that how something that we were innovating kind of gives us an interesting image of what happens to ideas, thoughts, premonitions, and also how you can also escape the fact of being narrated as something that you didn't do. So there are first few, basically what we will try to do is take you through some of the images of and videos and fragments and works in Yokohama Triennale, which was the first, first international Triennale or that scale work that happened during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic. So this is the first pandemic Triennale. In a way, there was one that happened in Poland at a much smaller scale, but this one has full scale thing and happened, and it happened as the Triennale started. The pandemic was declared. So from March, our shipping had started in March, and the pandemic in July we opened for 17. But it was, and when there was also lockdown in Delhi and everywhere. So in that sense, it's an interesting image. But the first image we are showing is of people. And we will show you a set of images that we prepared for with the people reading. And this is Yokohama, this is reading, and it is an event in which we are there. So it is November 2019. So this Yokohama Triennale, we had decided that we will inaugurate it as it's conceptually, thematically, about 9 months, 9 months before, with our publication and our essay. And what we are thinking, we will make it public. And so we kind of structured the Triennale, which will come later, in a form of a series of micro movements that is happening in Yokohama and elsewhere, various structures. That was the design. And this is the first such event. Monica will need to show the next
Yeah,
image.
I think it might be a moment actually with this image to talk about anticipation. Shuddha
So-
gave a nice clarion call to think on what the idea of anticipation when you look at an empty building
So
is,
this is an
especially when
empty
you're talking
building.
about 9 months.
Yeah. So this is an empty building. This is a building that was made in the mid 1980s. It was, and now you see this emptiness. Now this is not an emptiness of the pandemic. This is the emptiness of the morning, but when we are preparing to invite visitors to this event that we did in November to release what we'll show you is called the source book. So this idea of this emptiness, which is where we are all there, and this emptiness is something that we all actually live with. That's the anticipatory emptiness. That's not the emptiness that we have to now dealing with. So this anticipatory, this kind of like welcoming emptiness, an emptiness that knows that it has to get filled up with the multiplicity of presences. So these are the few images that we thought that will be an interesting, that emptiness is not new, that emptiness is very much part of the way we live with our events and life. And then this moment where we are introducing actually the Triennale, which is 30th November. This is 30th November 2019. The dates are important because dates start getting scrambled as we move ahead. And Monica, it will be nice if you take us through some of the ways in which we, and then.
Yeah, I mean, just to say that 30th November 2019 was probably the time when someone started getting sick in Wuhan. It's roughly, so this moment already, yeah.
Yeah,
this
already,
moment
the
of
first case.
Of waiting to begin Triennale, which would happen later in a year that would be marked by the virus. It's strange to think that the virus was already making its presence felt without knowing. So there was an anticipation of not knowing what was going to happen, which was real. So the two kinds of anticipation at play here.
Well, very briefly, I think what I'll do is I'll just go through some of the images of that afternoon, and which led into an evening where we had invited a number of artists to enact performatively, discursively, but not in the way that one would consider like a talk. They were sorry, it's frozen. Yes. Yeah, there were performances. There were. This was a durational performance. This one was a performance where, in a different kind of way, one saw life form and one watched what Hisham was doing, where non-organic compounds came together and, in front of your eyes, literally made worlds. And it was interesting then to think about the question of life, what constitutes life, is something that grows collectively in reaction with each other, a certain form of life as well. This question has obviously has come to haunt us differently when we think of non-living. Well, the virus is what we've called a non-living being, but in a sense has its own power as a life form because it grows, it multiplies, it seems to have a capacity. And when you watch something like this, when you watch a performance by Hisham, some of these questions definitely come into play. There was also a reading by Nishioka, who is actually a well-known news reader on Japanese
NHK.
television, on NHK. And we invited her to read these fragments of text that were from a series of interviews that went to make a book called The Affordance of Everyday Life, which were these conversations that the anthropologist Tom Gill had in the 90s with Nishikawa-san, Kimitsu Nishikawa, who used to be a day laborer, like on the docks of Yokohama, when there were docks where people worked in the same way as we're talking about. and he would work the days he wanted to work. He would drink a lot on the days he didn't want to drink. He read a lot. He read constantly. He made no hierarchies in his reading. He read history. He was very keen on English history and Churchill. He also read Deleuze. He read philosophy. And he was happy to talk about all of these things while getting drunk or not in conversation with Tom Gill. So for us, I think the question of, as you know, Cuauhtémoc, the question of autodidacticism has always been a fascinating one. And I think this idea, a non-hierarchical intelligence, or what constitutes intelligence. So I think in a way, the event of the 30th of November, 9 months before the exhibition, but in a sense, the beginning of the Triennale, and that was one of the ideas, was to mark time in that way. And Triennale is not just an exhibition, it is a duration of time where there is reflection, there is conversation, but also there is anticipation. So there was the marking of certain sets of ideas, such as what can our autodidactic propulsions take us towards? What constitutes signs of life? What, if you saw Lantian's performance, it would make you think on perhaps credits are the most interesting part of a film. So that which is not seen perhaps can be examined again. And I think it was these kind of ruminations that we wanted to share, not in a kind of direct way, but through the performances or actions of that day, and also through the source book, which is to say, here we are offering a certain methodologies as well as philosophies, as well as capacities, by making public with you, to you, certain sets of ideas, right? So the source book had our essay, which was the only essay in a sense that we wrote for the Yokohama Triennale, which said, come reflect with us. And by the time you come to the exhibition, and we will see you at the exhibition, you will also have certain sets of queries that the essay and other extracts that we had from sources, what we call sources, not resources, not things that would get transmuted, but fragments of text and other material that we collected from books and texts that were global, that were cutting across time, that were cutting across categories and hierarchy, a lot like Nishikawa.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to take that forward to say that there was a deliberation to the idea that the discursive apparatus around the exhibition would not be an afterthought. It would be part of the, if we want to say, anticipation of the exhibition. That the thinking process and the discovery of sources was already going to be made public to the public before they could actually be present in the exhibition. So there was a certain deliberateness with which episodo 00, or the 00 episode of the Yokohama Triennial, happened 9 months before it happened, in the sense that there was a kind of premonition of what it was going to set itself up as, and an unfolding that happened before. And this included, it's a kind of rehearsal of many of the themes: friendship, autodidacticism, looking at the world from the streets of Yokohama, thinking about the relationship between fluxes and flows in a harbor town. And as Monica said, a different, we have come to think much more about it recently, a different attitude to knowledge and the formation of knowledge, kind of epistemic trespass. So the source book in Japanese and in English already presented the public with a set of clues to what the Yokohama Triennial was going to set itself out to do.
So
except that they were not themes, and also except that they were not, okay, anyway.
Monica, can you go back to the 2 slide back to the, just want to say that what saved us in a major way is that, so, and 1 step back, just the title. Yeah. So, can't be read actually. Sorry. So basically, the source book, the sources were a combination of looking at friendship, like immaterial worlds of friendship, autodidacticism, and also the material world of toxicity, and actually how do you engage and live with toxicity. So this was the two tensions that the source book had built up. And toxicity was a much more bigger question coming from various civilizational inquiries that we were into. But this is November 2019, please remember. Then by March, and if we move ahead, the episode we had set up, and we had set up a process which was called Deliberations and Discursive Justice, with a group of one artist, curator, and archivist, Lantianshi from Dubai, Cabello Malatse from now Cape Town, and Michelle Wong from Hong Kong. So and we had set up this another strand which was introduced during the episode, which was called Deliberation, and they are supposed to do series of episodes, but in different cities, in Johannesburg, in Hong Kong, and deliberating on the idea of what is the space of discursive justice. And so they produced ideas of scenography, after party, but this is all to have been staged. So March was supposed to be, we were supposed to be in Hong Kong doing an after party. Then we were supposed to move to Yokohama. So by the time the Yokohama we moved to, it was supposed to be a caravan of ideas and people and works that is moving to Yokohama. But then interrupted in March. So when it got interrupted, and then many of the questions starts coming. So the exhibition with Japan, the Yokohama authorities started. So this is this is episode 2, Johannesburg, but this happens in August, that's September. This happens in September.
Yeah.
This is September, Johannesburg. So we'll come to a little bit of explanation of that. But the most interesting thing that, and this is something that when we were talking about the Yokohama Triennale in April and May in interviews, one big question that everybody would ask, because we had luminous care, we had living care with toxicity, we had the idea of autodidacticism, learning your own way into the world. So they thought we had retrofitted ideas to the pandemic. So the Triennale was something else and we were retrofitting. But what was fascinating is that because of the November episode, because all these ideas were in public life, so it kind of, the source book kind of anticipated the theoretical and the philosophical response to the pandemic. And that is something that we are still trying to intellectually grapple with. What does it mean, this anticipation, this premonition? And this is something that we want to put in this discussion, that within the art world, to take art world very seriously, because within that there are threads that can anticipate and has premonitions about a coming unfolding and a coming time in a way that the protagonist may not be fully aware of. Shuddha, Malik, yeah?
Well, I think because this is a kind of a journey, in a way, it's funny, like it's only been a year and something since the exhibition closed, or less than that even. And yet it feels oddly both quite close and quite far. So I'm quite enjoying this revisiting, thanks to you, Cuauhtémoc, of looking at the exhibition once again. So this is in a sense the moment of encounter with the museum, another building made in the mid-80s, completely different from the first space that you saw. This is the museum, the Yokohama Museum of Art. The other building you saw was an ancillary plot 48, as we claim to call it, building borrowed for the exhibition, which used to be actually a building used as a kind of children's theme park for little children. It was quite interesting, of course, because the exhibition inhabited both the museum and a building that had a completely different history, a completely different sound, a history of sound and a history of visuality. But it was interesting when we had first come to the Yokohama Museum of Art, and I think any of you, if you take like 1 second to Google what the YMA looks like, you will see immediately what a transformative experience it is to see the building through the work of Ivana Franke. And one of the reasons we invited her to do And you know, I remember this text that we had sent saying, and you know, that Ivana, can you make a building disappear? And she addressed that question. It was a great journey, quite a challenging journey in some ways, because when you look at the museum, you realize what an ambition it has, right? It is a building, an architectural ambition. It has an ambition of solidity. It is that moment in the 80s where there's a certain kind of exuberance from the kind of being the parlaying financial capital that Japan has. And it was interesting to say, what happens when you come to a building where you know it, but when you look at it, it seems to have lost its solidity. What happens when you transform an experience of an architectural encounter into one that seems far more ephemeral and evanescent, but allows you to feel at the same time lighter? And so this is what Ivana did. And as the director of the museum afterwards said, it felt like the museum had worn a summer kimono, which felt like it was going back to certain other histories of weather and body, and that the building itself had a different kind of embodiment. And it's a little bit hard to tell here, but what happens in the experience is that it feels, because there's play of light and line, it feels like everything is jittery. You know, in case you ever see, I don't know, it's looking through a very dense web, it feels a little bit like that. So this was the first experience of the Yokohama Triennale of Afterglow. It made you open and curious to the next thing, which is the question of wait a minute, sorry. Which was this. So when you entered the building, from that serenity, from the summer kimono, you entered into this explosion, absolute visual explosion, the work of Nick Cave, where everything was turning and twisting, catching the light, catching, glancing color of the space.
So the important thing to note here is that this was all installed with online meetings and with massive list of instructions. So the whole experience was to understand the work through multiplicities of instructions, and how precise you can get in the instruction, because every scale and everything the whole installation was done by artists and us all remotely, by an excellent group of people who understood that that lot of lens is mediating in the making and sensing of the work. So this is a very important transition that happens, and now this has become almost second nature to a lot of the working that is happening. But that time it was not second nature. It was unbelievable that we won't be there. In our mind, it was unbelievable that we're not installing the artists, having made new works, were not installing there. Extremely complicated install. And it was done with precision instructions and continuous online interfacing.
Yeah, I think.
And also, I have to say, with a lot of commitment and trust, just to finish this thought, from the team who were in Japan. I think this was something which is really important to note as well, the fact that there had been, I think, Jeebesh, what is important has been that, before that, we had been many, many times. Actually, in January was the last time that we were. And I remember coming off the plane and walking in Delhi airport and seeing a sign that people from Wuhan had to go in a kind of separate line, and I had no idea what was going on. That what was this separate line and what was going on? But it was a question of I think this is something that is maybe important to say, is that the order of conversations and the order of trust and the order of opening out ideas of what constitutes an exhibition and why certain processes are necessary. And it's not just a question of like, this is the work and then this is it. You know, that over the many months that we had gone and spent time and had written and spoken with everyone in Japan, it had really been about asking what can an exhibition be, and you know, not just in terms of its logistics and preparation of that order, but also what can a triennale be that is different from an exhibition? So having those kind of conversations, and I think it creates a certain atmosphere of trust and commitment, which is quite important to register. That's all. Sorry, Shweta.
Yeah, I mean, I think both what you're saying and what Jeebesh said points in another interesting attitude to the temporal. I mean, we started by talking about anticipation, but this entire period of the pandemic has also taught us, especially through this medium of like having, like Jeebesh said, precise instructions on Zoom, coordinating time zones between different continents to be able to install a work between the architect, the artist, us as curators, and the museum's staff. You know, it's a complicated production to be able to produce the global moment of installing a particular screw in a particular, let's say, piece of wood. But what that produces is also a sense of lag, which is the opposite of anticipation. We're not exactly coincident temporally. And it was a new condition to be able to be patient with the lag of others and be patient with our own sense of we're not there, which made us think, or makes me think of the way in which the title of the exhibition itself became a semaphore, afterglow. And as we wrote in the text, afterglow comes in the wake of illumination. There's a certain lag between the flash and the afterglow. It comes in the wake of illumination, but before darkening. It's a luminous interval, a glowing anticipation, a lambent flow. We called it a charged current of antoshila, interstitial energy between thickets of presence and episodes of becoming. Sometimes it is the aura of an explosion. And I remember we talked a lot about this, that when, you know, who were growing up in the 80s and 90s, when we would turn on the television and you'd see that snow, you know, in the television, that is actually a residue left over from the Big Bang. It's cosmic background radiation. So every time you turned on the TV, you're actually seeing the afterglow of the beginning of the universe. It's also the static on the radio. Sometimes it's the radioactive remainder of toxicity. We talked about a phenomenon called Cherenkov radiation, which is what the brain registers as a flash of light, but the eye does not see, because the radiation's velocity is much faster than what the eyes can register. So they slow down when they meet vitreous humor, the liquid presence of the eyes. And that is why you see an event inside the brain that your eyes have actually never encountered. And this is what happens when a nuclear reactor melts down. Cherenkov radiation is a phenomenon that people talk about a lot. So there are all these kind of ways in which the glow of toxicity itself becomes a way of thinking about the relationship between an event, an incident, and its aftermath. It was very strange. There was I hesitate to use the term that there was something occult in the way in which the conditions of viral dispersal of the pandemic were beginning to visit themselves in the strange intersection of proximity, quarantine, distance, lag, and learning to keep and cope with isolation that the production of the Triennale produced. So there's a discussion that I know Jeebesh wants to take forward of how the concern about care, which was very strong in our articulation of the Biennale, was seen by some as having retrofitted from the pandemic, although it was always there. But there's also a way in which the making of the Biennale itself produced those conditions of contact, contagion, quarantine, and care. These are both in terms of its statement as well as its execution, perhaps something that the pandemic condition produced.
Monica, you can go to the perimeter of the one idea that. Oh.
Yeah, I'll just. But you want to talk about episode X now or later?
Yeah. No, we can talk here. This is an important moment. So we can discuss this.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
This is so we are taking fragments, trying to make sense of it for ourselves also. So we found this moment very. We did this so-called episode of X. Now the opening of the exhibition was postponed by 14 days because of quarantine regulation. The work schedules of every team was changed because only a certain number of people could work at a time, only certain distances had to be maintained, only certain time that materials would come. So what was fascinating was that every artist, you send a work to a biennale or a triennale, and then you mentally prepare a lot for the work, and depending on whether it's a new commission or whatever, there's a lot of work you do in your mind, and then there is an opening, and there is a kind of some level a kind of a relaxation, and then you think that the work has gone into public, and you wait for its transmission, and you see its lateral energies along with other works. But here, the opening was a distance. The works were getting made. People were continuously, extremely heightened interaction was happening. But when we invited everyone to episode X, which was, can you make works for an online experience, online moment of the exhibition? Because we wanted to start the exhibition the way it was planned before, but in a different way. So what was fascinating was every artist started making work in this kind of very simple invitation, because there was the source book, they had already made a work, a lot of conversations was happened. So they were innovating, and this process, this is something that we were both thinking today. This process continued through the exhibition. We made another episode with all the many artist contributions. Until the end of the exhibition, the artists saw the exhibition site as a generative site. The exhibition as an idea. There was no site anymore. The site was everywhere. Site was in your studio, sitting anywhere was the site. So there was a dispersal of the site, and there was a continuous idea that it's a generative moment that the work. So the exhibition, after it started, produced enormous amount of work. So in this the red figure you see, this is basically a performance that is happening in the making of a work in the exhibition, which is slowly being transformed into a work by itself. It is because the idea that there's a disjunction between the public and the non-public. Who is your new public? Where is the studio? Where is the performance? These disjunctions became a creative site where Triennale became the site where you start producing those possibilities, those experiments. And if you go to the Yokohama Triennale site, you will find many episodes where you see this energy, like one episode where it was, this is the episode of 10, where artists made videos and we just kept on uploading it. And then there was an episode where artists did a 48-hour continuous work. The work that went on for 48 hours. This is episode of 10. So, and this episode had, I think, these are all artists in the Triennale making works for the Triennale, new works, because the Triennale was seen as a new site of generative work and experiments. And all these works are experiments, and some part of it which artists have not done themselves ever, that kind of work.
And it's a new form of publicness, because they realize that because the way in which the event would go out into the world would be very different now, then there was also this decision then to create a kind of an amphibian presence, an offline presence and an online presence that the artists themselves, in some senses, invited themselves into.
The idea is that there was no tertiary, secondary experience. Experience was a blurred line. There is no primary experience, secondary experience, tertiary. It is a kind of one very kind of indecisive, kind of continuum, disrupted and interrupted. So that was the environment.
But I think we must, it was also, besides the things that you were saying, I think there was also, because of the, and I think this is something we all felt last year, the sort of confidences that one had in the world, that the world was gone the way it was going on, the kind of assumptions, I think. The pause, the halting of that definitely also had a lot to do with this, right? The fact that there was time to reflect on your own assumptions, the fact that this idea that you know, without your presence, your work couldn't exist in the way that you thought it needed to, or the fact that you know, no one even knew when we would be able to go somewhere again. No one knew whether there would be the same, and also there was that feeling of, should it even go back? I think there was definitely a strong feeling last year. There was, I remember seeing multiple memes at that time, multiple conversations which said, things shouldn't go back to the way they were. I mean, it already seems so far away now, because there's been in the last month a very slow sort of, or not so slow perhaps, to me it feels like a pushback to that. But there was definitely a strong sense of will, besides the fact that they needed, like you were forced into a disassociation with certain methods. There was also an excitement, and besides anxiety, there was also excitement. There was also desire for, and a curiosity for new possibilities. And I think some of those experiments are simply people acknowledging the fact that maybe it doesn't have to be the way they thought, right? Maybe the artwork doesn't have to be a completed artwork. I mean, what is an artwork? You know, if you have no idea what your publics are, or in that sense you're making new publics, it is an act that is done together between public and you, even if it's being done online. And I think that was in that sense, there was, you know, it seems like it was, I'm speaking in the past tense, and a little bit I am, but I do think that there was a kind of shift for a lot of people for a while, strongly felt.
This is a parallel project that was running just at the same time in Delhi, which was called 5 Million Incident. And this whole, it was basically a project that had taken the Goethe Institute building, and artists were occupying it in various different temporal logics. But that whole project shifted online, and there was some fascinating thinking, and that's still going on. And each artist finding a way to mold and create event space, create processual spaces along this same time as we were doing. It was parallel to the, and it was a mutually nicely shared experience at the same time.
I just want to, I was thinking about the fact that Yokohama Triennial went where few dared to go. I mean, the Olympics, for instance, were supposed to open at the time and they didn't. The Olympics waited, but contemporary art perhaps was faster on the uptake to insist that it must live in a different form than the Olympics. I was reading very recently that the Olympics, the absence of a public in the Olympics has become a new kind of rhetorical question. Who are you doing your athletics for? And one way in which this has been negotiated is the incredibly sophisticated use of sound in the Olympic broadcasting. So that in previous Olympics, where you heard the applause of the public, and this time they tried to produce some fake applause and it didn't work, what they started doing was to catch the sound of the breathing of the athletes. So in a sense, that tells us something, that when publicness becomes a question, then other ways of finding relationships between the sporting moment or the aesthetic or the artistic moment and its deferred recognition or its relayed recognition or its distant simultaneity have to come into play. I mean, these are all questions we've actually never thought so much before, but I think the pandemic shut a door and opened a window for us to think again about what contact, proximity, and distance means. But we had to do that in the Yokohama Triennial, and I find it fascinating that the Olympics have to address the question in a different way.
You know, that reminds me of, actually, I can't believe I've forgotten this, but I remember this conversation that we had with the team then, which is that one of the earlier editions of the Yokohama Triennial had been soon after the Fukushima event, and some months after that. And even that time, there had been this question raised that should the triennial continue, and they had. And what they said was that that was the edition that had the highest number of people ever visiting, and at least the city, because the city government is also a big part actually of the Yokohama Triennial, city and the museum, or I suppose more generally, it was read as the fact that when things seem to be more challenging, more difficult, people turn towards something that makes them think and feel differently. And so then it was almost posed as, how can we not have the Yokohama Triennial? We can't, because people will want to come. People will come, and in that sense, they were right. I mean, people, they were always to the limits that were possible. There was always a full house in the triennial. Jeebesh, you want to talk about peripheries itself?
Are we running out of time? Just hint at this one or two of the. Otherwise, it looks like the Triennale was not showing anything, only digital. There was this kind of a physical life to the Triennale. There was work. We just show one or two works here, like by Asako and Amol. One big question that we were engaging with many artists was this idea which we tentatively had termed between us, and then it became a term that many of us were using, called the perimeter of the self. In a sense that what are the ways in which the artistic has to engage, conjures, what kind of biographies, lives, and what are the sources they're pulling in. So it's kind of a period, like in this Asako's father, it's based on the diary of Asako's father. And this is the photograph, and you can see the hand showing photograph. This was in Sri Lanka in the late 60s and early 70s. And he was an agricultural scientist and also a kind of an amateur or autodidactic sociologist. So he was basically doing an ethnography of Sri Lanka and hunger, and engaging with food and hunger and intensely. And actually, and what happened over a period of time, when he came back, he became a kind of a man who was brooding with himself and forgot to take care of himself and collapsed. And he kind of created a whole world of uncared world of or not being able to clean his surroundings, and he kind of collapsed in his debris. So this idea of hunger, the world of Sri Lanka, then Sri Lanka going into an internal genocide and completely changed, transformed. So the images have become images of the photograph and images of a lost world. So in that sense, her perimeter, and she had to go to the archives in Belgium to find material of the plants and things about the things that her father was gesturing towards. So this perimeter, trying to understand your father, she has to go to Sri Lanka. She has to go to a history that is very, very complicated and very difficult even for the inhabitants to even comprehend. And then she has to look at the history of falling off the grid in Japan, and she has to go to Belgium. So this kind of circling and kind of opened up in various journeys. This is what we got interested in, primarily because Asako was the first artist we met. primarily also because in Japan, the narrative was that we are a closed society, we do not take travel, and it's kind of internally coherent system of people being satisfied with the life that is being offered or dissatisfied but staying within. So this journey of trying to look for, understand and discuss perimeters of self. So like Amol's father is from a Powder Singers group, and he left behind a huge archive. Powder Singers are singers who were primarily practiced by ex-untouchables, but Dalit, now Dalit singers and people, and they stayed in Bombay together in chawls or housing settlements near chawls. So Amol has this incredible archive, and if you see, this is a Walkman. This is an old style Walkman, which is from the time that his father recorded voices, recorded sounds, and also the sounds that Amol records. Amol records sounds of mosquitoes and various kind, and father had recorded sounds of fans and this. So what you have is an archive, but that archive has a density that goes civilizationally very old. So one of the things that we slowly unpacked and artists were trying to work out. So this whole question of the toxicity becomes civilizationally a very difficult question. Like Indic civilization has a very difficult question of dealing with toxicity. So they divide labor into menial, manual, and intellectual labor. And the menial falls with the toxic and falls outside the touchable realm of the social. So this story of toxicity as something, an incapacity of civilization as much as the capacity to understand, and that incapacity now becoming more and more troubling, more and more difficult. And now with the latest IPCC report, we know that there is no business as usual, there is no return to nothing. And so what we will be living with a world in which, unless we know how to care for toxicity and unless we understand and unpack the civilizational blindness or blockages, it will be difficult. So this is the perimeter of self, kind of intellectual argument that many artists kind of confided and developed in their work. Monica, you're still. Yeah, this is what Yuki. Yeah, so because she, to understand a sister who had a certain form of mental disability, she had to go into the whole history of mental illness in Japan of 100 years, how it shapes up, and how come Japan starts having in 60s and 70s the highest number of sanatoriums in the world, and how the society has to start producing a discourse. And she found transcripts of the 1940s of nurses and between doctors and patients and nurses, where when you read the transcript, it's basically clear that the patient have read the doctor. It's not how the doctors are reading the patients have actually. So she reads back as the transcript and finds the voice of the patient reading the system. So that's the perimeter of the self that we were in trying to work out. To understand your own closest affective relationship, you have to then unpack something much incomprehensible big, but you collide with it.
Actually, Renuka was one of the few people whose work was being, unlike most people whose work had to have left their shores some at least 3 months before or 4 months before the exhibition could start because of shipping and quarantine and so on. But because Renuka was working with paper and fabric, she was just going to FedEx the work. And she was actually working during the quarantine. And it is fascinating to see the kind of states of mind and body that she was making in her work. And I remember her texting saying that she was having, in a sense, a kind of an explosion of artistic feeling or sensibility, in the sense that she found herself, because of the kind of strange stoppages around her, she was, not because of them, but she said there's some connection, obviously, because if she just felt like she was really exuberantly capable of rendering that experience of time and that specific moment that she was going through. We're just showing some more work. This is the work of Sato Masaharu, who has recently passed away after the exhibition, actually before. And he was painting these paintings while he was rather sick and almost blinded. But there's a relationship with color. And I think perhaps the reason we bring this image up is also kind of this complex relationship between absence and presence, and how one generates or creates something where some of the obvious parameters that one assumes are necessary are held in abeyance. This is the work of Taisir, who we were wondering, like, how everything, in a sense, when you look at the same work that read, in some ways, when you were looking at it 2 years ago, read differently 1 year ago, feels differently fragile a year later. And of course, that is the nature of the work itself, of course, but it's also the nature of the times that we are, the extraordinary times, in some senses, that we are all going through. And the fragility to me of these keys of the house, actually, from Taisir's home, or family's home in Palestine, which they could not go back to, but becomes about so much other. Anyway, I will keep just going through some pictures.
Yeah.
Maybe you should talk about Naeem.
Shuddha, you talk about Naeem.
Yeah, this is again one of those strange loops about whether there's anticipation, there's premonition, or it's retrospective. Naeem Mohammed is an artist from Bangladesh, currently in New York, and he has been going back and forth between India, Bangladesh, and America, looking and caring after aging parents. And in that context, he has had many conversations with us about what it means to care. And we wanted to invite him to think about care, again, months before the pandemic actually opened. And he made a film, Jolly Dobena, It Does Not Drown, about the conversations between a man and a woman in what appears to be an abandoned and empty hospital. So this setting of a kind of limbo of medical equipment, the apparatus of abandoned care, became a strange parable for the time that we were in. And again, without premeditation, but perhaps with premonition. And that leads us again to the question of what Jeebesh hinted at before, the capacity of artistic work to channel realities that it may not even be consciously aware of. Is there a way in which the work that all of us do in the imaginations, in the realms of the aesthetic, is there something that we are eavesdropping on the conversation of the world and the time, perhaps even listening to a virus before it begins to speak, listening to ourselves in quarantine, listening to ourselves in proximity and in distance, that we're able to perhaps create a response to the world that is both strange, but also very intimate, both surprising, but also close to the bone. And the Yokohama Triennial experience led us to believe that the world has an afterglow that you have to be prepared to receive. And the preparation to receive the illumination of the world is one of the reasons why we all do, why you, Cuauhtémoc, do what you do, why we do what we do, and why we keep at it every day. I think we'll end our presentational
no, there is
part
some
work now.
Monica, there are some more, one or two themes. Yeah.
Do you just want to end on this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is what I was thinking.
Perhaps the walkthrough, a little bit of the video walkthrough to give
a
sense of it.
Then we can discuss and show more.
Yeah, I'll just move to this. So one of the things that we did do when the exhibition opened was that we had an evening which was for all the artists, Zoom evening for all the artists and all the members and the curatorial team. And what we did was we did a walk, because when you participate in an exhibition, the excitement about a biennial, which I think is, besides some of the other things that we can talk about, I think, but as a participating artist, is that you realize that you're part of a weave that is being constructed, which is temporarily of the now, where some arguments are being made in which you're both a player and part of the larger ideas. So it's really always a pleasure that I find when I go as an exhibiting artist into a biennial to see how it's all coming together, which is different in a sense from even an exhibition in a museum. And we felt that because so many, well, none of the artists except the ones in Japan, of course, were able to see their work in situ and to be able to see the exhibition in its entirety, we did an evening's walkthrough. And here we just want to play a little fragment from a moment that day.
Her canvas installation. There is a large film projector. This is a
Monica, you have to say who is speaking.
35mm film, looping this large looper. This is Rosa Barba's work, Bending into Earth.
This is, we saw that archaeological dig, and so there is a kind of this is a kind of the impossibility of the archaeology of the future. Here, Rosa takes on an incredible toxic kind of sites and radioactive sites, and produces for us an incredibly poised image of that which cannot yield archaeological results. And if it yields, it will be threatening to us. And it's also a kind of a reading and a critical unpacking of the language by which modernity produces and talks about its own toxicity.
Can you just stand here for 1 minute, Eriko-san? I just want.
So that was we were walking with Eriko-san, and she was holding the camera, and we were walking the entire exhibition. But I think it was an interesting thing for us to end our presentational aspect, as Shuddha said, thinking on the question of the toxicity that we have to cohabit and the impossibility of an archaeology of the future if the terms don't change. So we'll stop at that.
What is quite amazing is that we were hearing Jeebesh's and Monica's voice talking like we are talking today, right now, to you, Cuauhtémoc. We were in Delhi in our separate homes. This was the opening of the Yokohama, the pre-opening of the Yokohama Triennial. All the artists had connected from their different laptops and terminals in different parts of the world. Our colleague in the museum was doing the walkthrough with her phone, and we had a conversation that was roughly about 3 hours long, all of us. So it was both presence and absence, lag and anticipation, and that condition of listening to yourself somewhere else in some other time, dealing with all the incredible strangeness of that, of being possessed by your own memories and voices at a deferred time. So it's like a Zoom within a Zoom, what we just experienced.
What a horrible image you've made. At least the nightmare within the nightmare has the idea that you escaped inside, but the Zoom inside the Zoom feels like a mirroring that you cannot really feel outside. I don't know how to explain that. But there's a moment when Zoom has, if you allow me to say it, and I'm going to go back to the substance of what you said, lacks illusion, isn't it? The difference between the transmission of a TV and the video and the Zoom is that somehow we are not in even if it is hallucinatory, you're still there. understand what I'm trying to say. The idea of assume inside assume is both perplexing but also unsettling. But I also, at the same time, I need to just respond saying that by thinking on this vernissage, this remote vernissage, this assembly of disassembled biennial participants, that provoked me both a feeling of excitement and sadness that I couldn't control. I was trying to place myself around that and feeling the void that you were describing, and everybody connected to this void, and somebody guiding you through something that was like Chernobyl, that it is too toxic to approach. It's the situation of the future that we will be forced to visit the earth at a time that you wouldn't be able to be present in the earth, no? It has this post-apocalyptic thing.
We will glow.
We will glow.
There is the artist Masaru, who is the show, who worked as a worker in Fukushima cleaning, toxic dump. So one of the things he would say, he would go there as a worker, 8 hours work cleaning. He would say that we clean, we put it in a polythene bag, we dump it, and then they seal it. So basically, it's a kind of a cycling of toxicity rather than cleaning of toxicity. So, and he had this elaborate work that he was supposed to do over a period of time. And his was that he will keep on cleaning. But during this void of a time in where actually the act of cleaning becomes an act that everybody has to learn in their houses, everybody has to learn to in their world. For him, it became a fascinating world because he developed an Insta feed where he gave them masks. Basically, he made personalized masks and gave to all the people who did ask for it. And they were cleaning at home and sending.
We can see them, no?
I think we have, Monica, we have some of those images. So this, look at this image. This is the image is very difficult to decode. This is an Insta image shared with Masaru because he has given the. So he has given just a graph. He has just given a graphite kind of, because graphite is what you use for radioactivity. So it's a graphite cap. People made them into masks, everyone. And one very beautiful story he once said was that one of the person had, I think, lost their father. And after the funeral, he comes back and cleans his house and takes pictures and share it with friends with his mask on. It was for him the most personal moment that he had spent with himself. So there is no prearranged void. The void appears and then it's kind of cascades and fills up in other ways. And those are terms that we do not know. That's the unknown, the terms that are available and you kind of draw and make with. So that's this moment's a bit like that, where it has become manifest. A lot of the ways we urbanists would describe city would be this, that there is this kind of folding of things that would happen. But now everyday life, it's manifested. And this Masaru's work, the poignancy and the beauty of this work, because and it kept on developing. It was not that 1%, 2%, 3%. It kept on growing. So it caught on to some idea of a self that, in its act of cleaning, found with a kind of extension
and an immediate recognition. In this time, the business of sanitizing one's surroundings was something that became absolutely personal, intimate, and at the same time, a language you can share with anyone on the planet.
I would like to say that we would love if people have any questions or comments or just fleeting ideas, which is, as you can see, something that this episode will require or will demand. But I just thought a little bit going back to the question of what kind of shift in the public realm you are pointing to, that I think immediately on Maria Teresa Hincapié. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about, the Colombian performer that used to do these very basic daily activities, one of them precisely sweeping. And what I find fascinating is that rather than the formalization of these practically religious act of organizing, cleaning, or just probably inhabiting the space of performance with what everydayness should imply if it involves care. I'm just trying to articulate what I feel is in those performances of Maria Teresa Hincapié that are about how can you care about what has to be cared, and the beginning of what is to be cared has to do with tidying up. Mm-hmm. Yes. I feel that here the incredible thing is that you have first this contemporary experience that there is no private space, that everybody's home is just a stage, that we have become all Dutch, that there are no curtains, that everybody can just look inside, and we care about what's behind because everybody's looking at the inside. But secondly, the fact that they are wearing the mask, and they put so much effort in this shamanic act of making these protective masks, which are protecting themselves. That they found a privacy of sorts by masking. So there's an element where you can feel that they are emphasizing that they are doing something, that their mask is protecting them from the exposure, and at the same time they are enacting a certain mimetic act towards those cleaners. All that is a very convoluted and complex place, which is again the Zoom space, but it's also a little bit more of a. I mean, I just realized that Zoom and room are things that are to be at one point brought to be discussed, and these rooms are the first image you showed had this element that I found crazy, that if you could put it back, the person was wearing a cat mask, and she had the dog tied, and dogs and cats. I don't know why I felt that there were all these little connections, that the leash is red, her blouse is red. There's a certain sense of why do you think people are participating? That's you said that there was something eloquent about the artist's call, but how is it that this is a moment of participation?
See, one thing, first of all, you have to understand, in Japan from 1950 onwards, and this is what we have learned from Masaru, there is a whole reorganization of the idea of cleaning in the society, and cleaning as a part of the self-image. So like the children in kindergartens are taught to clean their rooms. So cleaning cleaning is a site of how the collective is supposed to be perceived. And cleaning is the way in which it has got to do with the trauma of Hiroshima. It has got to do with the trauma of Second World War, the debris and the rubble. And it has also got to do with the way they've refashioned, the state refashioned the social. But there is the kind of various different dissident kind of dissident reading of the cleaning. The cleaning as an act, not giving up on the cleaning of the act, but not performing it within the idea of the collective self. So that is one thread I understand from Masaru's own way of approaching cleaning. So he understands, like, after Fukushima, cleaning is very crucial for life to return to the whole region. So he does cleaning work for long years there as a worker, not as an artist. The artist practice, keeping aside his artist practice. And then his artist practice starts engaging slowly with this. But what is fascinating is that retaining the idea of cleaning as a practice, and because also cleaning is very much connected with self-care, like you're trained to self-care for yourself without an old age or disease or injury is a site where you lose that capacity. And that's where your body can become very toxic to yourself. And that's the caring of that's the care economy where it's built up. So this is the interstitial gap between caring for other, care as a denial of the collective self, but actually holding on to the idea of care with a certain degree of intensity and with the precision. And so that choreography is that precision, that it's an act of an individual, but it is also a defacement of the collective. That is what we understood from long conversation with Masaru. That's the terrain that it was working out. But there is.
Do you mean the collective, or do you mean the social self?
The social collective self. Like it is not because I'm Japanese I'm standing here. It is because the act of cleaning has a different temperature and a different tonality. So it is to take yourself out and also reinscribe yourself within a different paradigm. So that is one very important part of the way Masaru and all these people, I think, are working out the logic of cleaning. But this is a phenomena. Here the artwork has become a phenomenon. It is opening out an entry point into something very, very rich and very, very lot of latent doubts and plays are there. It is not manifest.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I learned, just as Jeebesh is saying, is that there is a way we are accustomed to thinking of art as a response to the world. Crisis happens, catastrophes occur, art responds, we recuperate. But there is something else as well, and which is what I think the pandemic condition has foregrounded, which is that art is not necessarily only a response, but it is also the transmission of the time. How would you I'm proposing that the virus is a hidden public collaborator, complicit critic in the making of the art that we're all doing, because everything that we do is now conditioned by these situation of maintaining a certain sanitary standard, maintaining a certain kind of proximity and distance. The art world's the obsession with, let's say, travel is now flexed in a different way, which means that the condition of the time is actually transmitting itself through the things we do and don't do, which is a different thing from responding to the crisis. Mm-hmm. We are the vectors of the time, not its, I don't know how to say it.
We are not in dialogue with time. We are somehow the vehicles or the transmitters. We are also part of the signal. That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Time is
the end of subjectivity, in the sense that is not the idea that there's the subject that is overpowering and has to do with the question of anticipation. I don't want to miss that, but I just want to get a little detail out of Mónica, because you seem to be suggesting that we have to make a distinction, if I didn't understand wrongly, between the social self and the collective. And I just wanted not to miss that, especially in relation to this Japanese notion of what is the collective or what is the social self. Did you mean something like trying to introduce a little distinction there, Monica?
For me, I think there is definitely a distinction in the sense that, and this could be a very intuitive kind of term, but the social self, especially in the context of like this post-war figure of the hardworking, much more equal society where there was less hierarchies, where everyone was working, cleaning together. And you're all trained, and we often see these videos on the internet, which circulate even in India, about look how hardworking and equal these children are, and they are all trained in that way, which is a certain construction. What you can call it collectivity, but it's not really, is it? It's like a certain construct. This is the social Japanese, contract, as it were, of which you agree to. As by being in that, you agree to that. Or, you go to school, you do that, you agree to that. But whether that propels you into a certain idea of collectiveness is a different question for me. So, for example, there is a phenomenon which is enormous in Japan. There's like 1.5 million people, the exact word is escaping me right now, who have locked themselves into their rooms. It's an extraordinary event, if you want to call it that. People who have locked themselves into their rooms, they are fed either by their families or by takeaway. They never leave the room, not even the house. And so there was this one artwork that we met the artist. He himself had been one of the people who had lived like that for 5 years, and because of the fact that he had been part of the community, there were also all these photographs. It was the experience of the piece was that as if walls were being broken, and within those walls you could see these photographs that people had taken who had locked themselves into their rooms for years on end of their lives, of their spaces. And it was a vista of, either there was one room that had like hundreds of garbage bags, another room there was just this thing that they had decided that they were not going to engage. The only engagement was through the interface of the computer. Now, that is a very different notion of whatever notion of collectivity. And I think there was a notion of collectivity, right? Those hundreds of thousands of these people talk to each other all the time. But they're not part of the other contract that the social that is expected of them or narrated about them. One of the ones that we heard was that Japan is getting more insular, less young people want to travel, they don't take as many passports, but at the same time, there were also counter-narrative. So it's always fascinating to me, like there is always a disjunct. The interesting thing is what happens when one can find the crack between, in that sense here at least, the social and the idea of the social and the idea of the collective.
Mm-hmm. I think that, I don't want to go necessarily over there, but you made me think on how frequently, a little bit unconsciously, people in this region of the world tend to allude to the community out of a certain utopian expectation coming from the indigenous and colonial structures. And these distinctions are there to be somehow explored. That because the togetherness that you are precisely pointing out, that is not the motion. The Japanese don't seem to be engaged in this expectation of togetherness. No, is not what is culturally happening here. Is people somehow fulfilling a role that, of course, is self-consciously devoted to an ecology. Everybody is contributing by cleaning into a general social possibility of order, and that is differently from, let's say, the kind of Maoist feast of going out to kill flies altogether. No? It's not the same self.
Yeah.
But I want to come back to the show, and there's something. I was checking the catalog, and and thinking back on your Shanghai Biennial. And I was very impressed of the way you developed here something that was there in Shanghai, but now is very present. And I will try to describe it as an attempt to create a maze of concepts and sensibilities rather than a succession of rooms. And here in Yokohama is emphasized by the way you have absorbed into the exhibition the lavishness, the somehow by now very somehow old-fashioned pretense of lavishness of the Japanese 1980s museums with their stone walls and their different levels and the fountains. I mean, you have a moment when you occupied with the artworks a succession of platforms that, in my view, had a fountain. And there's something about you seem to, if you allow me to put it this way, you seem to be delighted about having this ornamented architectural palace, because you can actually bring it to a feeling of becoming a part of the conversation. There's something very special that I will say. I am very astonished about your refusal of black boxes for videos, that you seem to be working with the artist and institution so as to have the videos occupying physical space and living in the rooms. I also assume that also sounds are somehow colliding. The image that Shuddha brought back of the dust in the TV as being the afterglow of the Big Bang is being radiation, is something that I feel happens with the works, the way they are subtly contaminating each other. And all that, I need to say, of course, for somebody that was brought in the old-fashioned museum tradition of making every artwork live in its own silence, protected from, ideally from the audience, but also from the environment, is something very exciting, because you seem to be doing something that I believe is not only a matter of sensation and form, it's a content, or it's an argument. Can you speak about that? Because here I feel, if you allow me to say it, forgive me to be rude, I feel that you've achieved here something you were trying to do in Shanghai, and somehow in Shanghai the architecture was not helping you. And here it looks really achieved.
Thank you for this. It's a very interesting observation, I must say. And this is, I think, all three of us must take a cue into it. I think our one very important site that Biennale or the Triennales are to explore contaminations as culture, and then there is this whole structuration of looking at contemporary art, and this is something that our discussions with artists have always been. There's a kind of a containerment of
containerization
of art as a display, as a way of thinking. So you think of how much space, and a lot of artists ask you how much space I have. How can you send me a map? Can you send me what are the walls? This kind of thing. And then there is this whole idea of how is the work getting? What is the affinities and antagonisms that the work are located in? And what kind of contaminations and what kind of energy or what kind of relays that are around it, that can impact it, that has to argue against it. So this kind of contaminatory flows, which will override, versus a containerized idea of description or showing. So this is something that we have been thinking for some time, and it has also affected the way we work ourselves and the way we work in our own work. Like we're quite free to express the video skills, screens or video work or sound, the sculptural element, or as an architectural moves. So, and what we have found most in Shanghai, this is a very interesting question you ask. Shanghai, it was actually, Shanghai was, because Yokohama we didn't go. Yokohama is completely, it has become too cerebral an experience. The affective experiences continuously has to be relayed back by seeing work independently. But in Shanghai, it was more, the idea was more to make it a extremely strong energy field that you come and explode, but with extreme detailing to stillness. It was almost like at one level, it is almost working with a cinematic paradigm, that you have a very rapid montage that opens up and explode, and you can just settle into an eye or a person's face, So that kind of framework by which the choreography happened, it is not very conscious. It happens over a period of time, so that by the third floor in Shanghai, we had almost achieved the stillness. That you, with the blue carpet, you enter and the room becomes still. And so many people I've seen would assemble there and start talking after there. So that stillness allowed voice to appear in people. But in Yokohama, I think the nature of the museum, the way the museum for us became something to contest its idea of futurity. Very simple. Like Monica once said that, I remember when saying that this is a futurity. This is not a building. This is a futurity. This is an invitation to think of a futurity and to contest that idea of futurity. So you produce a lot of contending platform, perceptional fields, colliding movements, and at no point you can see anything uncontaminated by reflections or glides. But if you want to see something with care, you can go and you will find that space. So it gives you that moment of contact. It gives you, but it lays it out that this moment of contact is you arrive at. It doesn't block. That doesn't block that moment of contact, or says that this is only moment of seeing the art. So there is a kind of a web through which you will find your moment of contact, that one-to-one. Like Naim's work was staged in a way that was very conventional at one level, but we decided not to paint the walls in a way that blocks off and makes it completely like that you are only seeing this film. And that really had a very, very specific experience of seeing that work. And I'll give you an example. Same Naim work was shown in a kind of an art fair few days by his gallery in Delhi. And they had a very small space to show it, and they used the short throw projector. And the short throw projector had this. And uniquely, people, and because of the pandemic, if you go and sit there, you can't move. So people had to sit there and cannot move. And the experience of the work was completely overwhelming. In Yokohama, it was much more serene. Though it is about death, it is about loss, longing, it is about care that cannot hold that which it is caring. But it is a kind of a care that has reached its limit and cannot hold on and can only think through the possibility of subjective life that it has lost. But there it was a serene experience because you thought you were in it. Here it was an overwhelming. So the video, the cinematic, has this way of actually the work develops, or work, the curator's view of the work actually shapes that intensity. So you're right in the way that Yokohama may have been for us a more confident and workouts paradigm of thinking through this contaminatory and yet extreme poise and directness. But I'm sure Monica and Monica would have definitely have, because you cannot move an inch, a projector here and there.
Actually, Jeebesh, that was, thank you, Cuauhtémoc. This formulation, I don't think we've ever had to reflect on in this way, and or to sort of think of, because often one thinks in terms of the experience of an exhibition, in terms of intensities or in terms of like affective zones. But I really like this push that you're doing, and I think, Jeebesh, what you touched on this, that perhaps Shanghai felt much more like a narrative, right? Like because of the durational, like there was a durational aspect of the exhibition in the sense that you went from one floor to another, which of course you do in every building, but it wasn't just an architectural duration. It was like the exhibition had created, like a film, created certain and not kind of ended, climaxed in that sense, with stillness, while the distant experience of Yokohama, it feels much more like multiple mise-en-scène that are unresolved and open and provocative at the same time. I would say that would be yeah.
I would like to say quickly before anything that you don't realize, but I feel that there's a level of uniqueness and originality in the way you put these things to be discussed, just in relation to the way in which you tend to avoid the classical thinking about exhibitions in relation to the divisions of space. And I'm not just talking architecturally, I'm thinking conceptually, is the fact that you're actually describing the timing as the ruling element of the thinking of the show. There's something I was simply struck in what Jeebesh said, and I mean, I was really taken aback as with a Zen hit on the head, which was to imagine that the work will have its time in the exhibition, that there will be a moment for the work in the exhibition, which is something I really don't think is being said. I just need to say that Monica will need to leave because she had to do something, but we'll stay a little bit longer with Jeebesh and Shuddha. Thank you, Monica. But yeah, I mean, there's an idea there that I have never heard. It has to do with something that is very significant, that there are a number of dichotomies that are usually phrased, which had to do, like, imagining that there are space works and time-based works. And then there's the all more frequent, and I would say more dangerous or heinous dichotomy that tends to believe that there is content, documentary truth, and
fictive.
And sorry?
Fictive or the artistic, the affective.
Yeah, and then there is fiction, and worse, there is decoration. And of course, everybody tends to say we are not ruled by modernist dichotomies, but these are things that are there. And there's something about the way in which you are, for instance, introducing the first moment of the exhibition, that you have these two times. And I now know that the way to describe them are times. The time of the dissolution of the architecture that was brought by the architectonic intervention, and then the immersion in this space of the installation, and the way your exhibition tends to behave on these immersions that are always described as moments, as events. Mm-hmm. I know that even the concept of the show is based on this notion of an event. The afterglow is a timing that happens before and after. That's what I'm trying to somehow say. That is is not the climax, it's not the unity, it's not the coincidence. I think Shuddha said it very, very appropriately, that there's no synchronicity, that there's a constant asynchronicity. That is what I find extremely provocative. Just what do you achieve by changing the not the concepts, but even the quality of judgment?
Yeah, I'm just tempted to slide a little bit into the future. There is an exhibition that we are working on right now, which will open hopefully in Vienna in a few months' time, and the invitation is originally was expressed in terms of the by now familiar trope of how do you decolonize a collection. And we responded to that invitation by arguing that the first mode of the mastery of the world, of imperial power, is to effect a division of space by time, such that some spaces are always pronounce their advance, pronounce their position in a sense, and others have to orient themselves to the position of some spaces. And we are trying to argue through both the scenography of the exhibition, through the curatorial intelligence that we are trying to bring to bear, that the first epistemic trespass in the effort to, let's say, decolonize anything, from a hive of bees to a empire to a city, is to completely modulate and transform the division of space by time, such that the arrangement of processes, objects, presences becomes, like Jeebesh was saying, tends more towards a mise-en-scène where things are looking at each other. We are accustomed to thinking of exhibitions where visitors look at artworks, but if one were to try and change the dramaturgy to say that works are also looking at each other, glancing at each other, looking away from each other, looking at the visitor, looking at them, looking away from each other, so that there is a kind of protagonist mode within which the artist, and here we are dealing with artists as disconnected in time as a master from the 16th century to a contemporary artist working now, and the visitor and the curatorial intelligence that is trying to present itself all become, in a sense, actors in the scene. So what we have then is a set of scenes rather than rooms, because the scene can spill from one room to another. So it's not the spatial boundary, it's not the architectural division that dictates the rhetoric of the exhibition. It's something else arguing with that spatial boundary that produces the rhetoric of the exhibition. I mean, one of the things that we became quite fascinated with was the, this ship, the Ever Given, which got stuck at an angle in the Suez Canal. Something about that moment of the ship not being able to turn, not being able to right itself, was expressing a relationship between space, flow, passage, and time that we think we have to think about. And that's what the exhibition is doing.
I'm, of course, very impressed with the suggestion that you're trying to make about the meaning of anticipation, because it displaces the argument from the narcissism of the prophet, if you allow me to put it that way, to the ethics of preparedness and the role of cultural production in that in being prepared. that the importance. I would like to stress the importance of something that you did, that was not to say we were right, which is the empirical validation of the prophecy, is we were prepared so that actually what we were anticipating not only made sense through the big challenge of time, but it became a way to establish a continuity to the previous moment. It's not, I find it fascinating because it's not about claiming that you knew. It's actually, as you presented it, that there was a moment where you don't need to be in the know to be ready, which is very, very remarkable. That it on the one hand, I find it very materialistic. It doesn't become mystic in any way. It really has to do with the question of even of understanding that you need to work towards arriving. If this makes sense in English, that the difficult problem and the historical problem is how do we move from planning to preparing to arrive. Is something that you did with the workbook. I mean, it looks to me that you have a certain clarity that had to do with this challenging of the way space is allocated in time in the decision of making the workbook. But can you speak a little bit about that? I mean, how was it that you were preparing? Is something that is very, because now you're talking about some other result of that preparation, but how did you prepare for this exhibition?
See, Cuauhtémoc, the preparation between three of us, and you have seen us together, it's basically a continuous movement of ideas, annotations. You're doing it, and you are doing lot of hearing about how artists are working out certain questions, certain ways in which they are thinking, and you're also kind of doing a lot of meetings in assemblies. Like we met many people in a group. In Japan, especially Japan, it became very interesting. China also, it allowed us. That was the most interesting part of working in China and Japan, is that you can meet people in assemblies, in groups of 5, 6, in a meeting, and then you go out, have a drink, and the conversation carries on with great language difficulties. And sometimes you will find that one person who takes on himself to actually translate and knows the language, both language brilliantly. So there is never a problem. And I think that's something that we all inhabit also. So that is one part of the preparation. The other part of the preparation is that I'll give you an example. There was this beautiful auditorium which we showed you, that empty auditorium where we did the episodo. It became also, after the episodo, it became also the host for an artwork by Andreas Grammer, who's an artist based in Berlin. Basically, it was artwork to do with algae, sea algae, which has bioluminescence. So one of the things that we wanted to do, because that's the architecture, is basically an auditorium is a space where time is segregated. And you go according to the time set by the person who is going to perform. So we staged the algae. We asked the artist, and artist got very excited, staged the algae in the auditorium. So an algae was playing the piano. It has a circuit. It was a very beautiful work. So the idea is that you have to now tune yourself to the time of the algae. So the dominant structure was the amphitheater. People immediately understand an amphitheater that there is a temporal logic. So there is no problem of communicating that. And then when they understand that temporal logic is working not by the time that they can keep, the time that we can keep as organizers of time, but the time that is being kept by a certain biorhythm of an algae, that architecture starts becoming very interesting. The question about the architecture of an auditorium, what the auditorium. So this kind of reading of like the building, that this is a futurity building. The other building, there were two buildings we did. Plot 48 is a building that is going to be broken down after we do. Completely gave rise to a different way of approaching the artist, the conversation with the artist and the artworks. So what happens is over the period of 2 years, that's why our essay in the catalog is called 720 days. If you read our essay, it's edited by Shweta, it's called 720 days, because it is actually tracking down the development of how we are proceeding. So which is basically a log of 720 days of working for Yokohama Triennale. So the log starts with that first day, kind of promissory notes that you send, which is the proposal, which is the promissory note you send to the process by which we are meeting, constructing, discussing, because we thought that this time we'll share the log, share our notes as much as we could, because some are confidential, as much as we could, so that the process becomes a little bit apparent to ourselves, but also can be talked about in short. And then we realized that 720 days has gone into making of the Triennale. And that is one reason we argue that Triennale is a duration, because between two biennales and triennales are actually not events, they're durations. And those durations are actually preparatory as well as unfolding. So that's one reason that we talk about through the episodo, and that's unfolding. So the Yokohama Triennale is structured as an unfolding. So from November, the Triennale is unfolding. So the main event becomes part of because the main event is an economic act, there's a capital flow that consolidates on the main event of the opening. So we made it as a part of a flow, and then we had multiple flow outside it, even happening in other cities. So that what happens is that everything is seen as some kind of a logic of something that is happening continuously and will keep on happening, but with various resting places.
There was something that, I don't know if Jeebesh or Shuddha said, that I found quite challenging, but I need to probably explain the audience something before that. And it's that in reality, or along the years, people in the contemporary world have seen Japan as a slightly conservative milieu in relation to the fact that exhibitions and audiences seem to be unwilling to engage into way too complicated intellectual arguments. And in general, the programs in exhibitions and in biennials have tended to be very relying on the quality or the attractiveness of visuality and the object. There's a general prejudice that actually sees contemporary Japanese art as commercial in that sense. But you said something that was really, really, on the one hand, counterfactual or counterintuitive and very promising, that you said that the reason this exhibition worked was precisely because people were willing to find a complicated or deep argument. That is a surprise. It's also something that I found nobody has ever told me about a Japanese exhibition. There's the opposite prejudice Is this something that you can discuss a little bit? Does it have to do with the precisely the tiredness of that complacency? It has to do with the moment, or it has to do with somehow the fact that there is something about this pandemic that has changed our expectations about culture.
Let me try and answer that in two ways. One is that I think that all of us across the world in different cultures and different contemporary art scenes always make the mistake of misreading or willfully misunderstanding our public. I think that the capacity for thoughtful engagement actually, paradoxically, surprise, surprise, exists in every culture. It's just as there is an expectation that Japanese contemporaneity has this populist melancholic ring. It's kind of division between populism and melancholia. I would wager that tell me one society that doesn't have that problem, right? So therefore, there is a kind of division of labor in which we say, oh, you know, if it's Japanese, it has to be cute. If it's German, it has to be serious. And if it's Arab, it has to be, you know, sharp and whatever, enraged. These are all products, in my view, of lazy thinking. It's an inability to assume that you can have interlocutory possibilities in any situation, in any historic time, in any given culture. You have to listen. And I think that part of our exercise in the preparation, which you were saying, was also to see a city like Yokohama as how curious was it about the world? Now, if you ask that question, you're bound to get an interesting answer. We asked, where in this harbor are there people who are interested in the world outside? Not about the Japanese-ness of Japan, but about the worldliness of the world. And sure enough, we found that person in the person of the dock worker that Monica referred to at the beginning, Kimitsu Nishikawa, who was this proletarian autodidact who taught himself from the books that came off the ships and built himself a library in his mind. Now, the question is, I think that we have to always how shall I say, be a little more present to the curiosities we allow ourselves to exhibit in different cultures. You know, I mean, should we allow ourselves to think about philosophy in Brazil? Why not? They have, in Brazil, for instance, a tradition of analytical philosophy that nobody talks about. Right? Mathematically inflected analytical philosophy that is curious about cybernetics and computers, because Brazilians were aeronautical engineers and interested in those kind of things. But when we talk about Brazil, we will talk about, you know, something completely different, right? We will talk about, you know, anthropophagia, we will talk about other things. So in every society, there are these surprises waiting to be found. And I think as curators and as intellectuals, it is our task to be a little open to those surprises. And
sure,
we found that.
I'm thinking about Willem Flusser as somebody that, of course, would need to be another point of departure in Brazil. Now, nonetheless, I would argue that what you were somehow suggesting, and I think it's important, is that this presumption about what is the role of contemporary art in relation to consumerism, of visual consumerism, it might be something that we should be able to challenge now more forcefully.
We should.
We've been trying, but there's always a certain institutional distrust of our attempt to go beyond that.
Yeah, we should. And I think that when we do that, I mean, I think that the lesson that we learn from societies like Japan and China is, and I'm sure you know this well, is when you challenge something, never say you're challenging it. Do it.
Well, I think we lost Jeebesh in the waves. But anyway, I'm just going to try to finish with a final question to you, Shuddha. And it's very specific. Of course, I was very struck with the image of Bagchini's sun clock that is, by being horizontal, it becomes entirely useless. But at the same time, Jeebesh is back. I was really struck with this image of this. I presume is a political image of the standstill
of suspended time.
Yeah, it's something that I will have to sleep over, and it has to do with how this image of the standstill clock relates to our whole business of these delays, these arrivals, and these interruptions.
Yeah,
that's one thing. The other element that got me very impressed is the fact that the image that you chose from the beginning from Sato Masaharu, I think it's this skull, this painting of a skull with a cap.
Right.
The fact that he died during the exhibition, all that, of course, has brings you to this feeling of what is this image doing in your project and your exhibition. Why did it become so iconic in Afterglow? And it has to do with this melancholy argument that you just brought out. But those are two images of melancholy. I just realized Dürer would have been just happy with both images. But beyond that, how do those two works work within the Afterglow argument?
Which two work?
Masaharu, the skull, the grinning skull,
and the aeroplane,
the intimation of mortality, and also Taisir Bagchini, the horizontal sand clocks next to the glass keys of the lost house in Palestine. So Cuauhtémoc is asking us a question about, I think he's asking us a question about an attitude to finality, an attitude to suspension, an attitude to liminality, limbo-ness, which both these works in some ways contain or...
See, it's very, but I'm trying to locate where they were in the exhibition and what was.
They were in the.
Like Masaharu now. Sato Masaharu is next to Oscar Santillan's Venus sculpture. There was this beautiful Venus sculpture, which is basically from the. He creates this mud of Venus from the various chemical composition. It's incredibly almost look like old archaeological dig find, but it is a sculpture from Venus. And then next to it is Masaharu's he drew these paintings almost when he was blind. So because he had his treatment, cancer treatment was proceeding, and he was losing his sight with his cancer. So these were drawn at the edge. So it was kind of a twilight images that has lost the description of the world, and is a kind of only had color and twilight. So this kind of imagine the twilight imaginations. This was towards the end. It's actually the last room. That kind of a twilight imagination, because there was this whole subsection current that was going on, which was basically about the shores of vision, shores of seeing, shores of kind of travel, of things traveling. So so it goes to that. That's the kind of, that thread goes there. It's a kind of a twilight zone of where you imagine time, or imagine time horizons very differently. So that's where the plane is also there. It's not that the skull; it's also the plane. And by the time you leave the twilight zone, it comes to this clock, suspended clock, and the fragile home, that there is no return to home, and there is no return to a time that is moving. So it was a kind of it was like a, where the twilight zone of imagination leaves you to a position of some kind of a zone. It's a zone. It's like a stalker's zone, you can say. Tarkovsky's stalker's zone. Where you reach a point of there is no return to a home. The home is a kind of an imaginary. There is no return. There is no redemptive return to a home. And the time will remain suspended. And time will remain indecisively suspended. There is no forward, backward movement that is you're going to get. So that's the kind of ruse through which it ends. It's a kind of it doesn't end, because after that there are goddesses and this like automated movement in the way. But what it does is just gives you one thread, takes you to that direction. So it's like
I would like to say that I want to just probably finish saying that that the image of Taisir Bajini's Suspended Time, although it's a work from 2007, has become, thanks to the three of you, one of the strongest images I have of this time. I think it is an anticipation of what we have had through these 2 years, and just the gift of having seen this work has been a whole justification for the great talk that you've given us. And I just really want to thank the three of you, and we need to finish only because we will continue. And
yes.
Thank you.
Suspended time.
Suspended time. And gracias a todo el mundo. Thanks to everybody for this great morning. And please stay sharp and stay tuned. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cuauhtémoc.
It was
lovely
fun.
talking to you. Yeah. Bye.
We should pick up again. Yeah. Bye, everyone. Bye.